Baseball has become a game of numbers. It's still this nation's pastime, but it can be described in numbers. So the marginal product of labor is something that can be helped to decide a player's value in terms of what they bring to their MLB team and to their MLB marketing ability. The first thing I'd like to get into is what exactly is MPN, or the marginal product of labor. So MPN is a change in output, which can be described as Y, for each unit change in labor, which can be described in N. As you can see on this graph right here, it just kind of shows how much output can be determined by each additional employee. So essentially, it's what a company feels like each employee is worth in terms of their output. So you might be asking, Nick, how does the marginal product of labor have anything to do with the MLB? Well, this graph right here is going to show what the MLB revenues have been over the last 20 years or so, and how it has been steadily increasing. There have been a couple dips, but it has steadily been increasing. There are so many things that can go into this. There are so many different avenues that you can have in terms of baseball. I'm going to try to go on a surface level a little bit here just because we only have a little bit of time, but just to describe how this marginal product of labor affects the players in the MLB and in turn affects the teams and the franchises in the MLB. A very important part of the Major League Baseball's team's revenue is their salaries, how much they're paying their players. The most important thing that can be garnered from this particular graph is the rise in the highest paid player salaries. You can see how much this graph has significantly increased over the years with the highest paid player salary. The other part of this graph shows the average salary of the players. This has risen ever so slightly over the years and doesn't have quite the same dramatic increase as the highest paid player's salary has. Something that always needs to be touched on when discussing the increase of such things as revenue or salary is how much the inflation has changed during that time. This graph right here is more of a historical grasp and not really baseball, but it's more of a historical grasp since 1870 of what the inflation has looked like in the United States. As important as it is to understand the overall MLB revenue, it's also important to break that down a little bit into each team's revenue and, to be more specific, each individual market. Because as you can see here, the teams and the cities that are on the right side of this graph are bigger cities. They live in bigger markets. So that's something else to consider whenever you're looking at the team revenue, because just how the way the big city works, the bigger the city, the bigger the market, and the bigger potentially that team revenue is going to be. But you can still focus on each individual market and what they can bring to each individual player's value in terms of that particular team and that particular market. I discussed earlier on how much statistical the game had been, and one reason for that is the implementation of sabermetrics. So the sabermetrics are how to describe the game not by what your eyes can see, but by numbers. One of the biggest statistical explanations of the sabermetrics is something called WAR, or wins above replacement. The individual in this particular image is Jose Altuve. He's a second baseman for the Houston Astros. He won the American League MVP last year. He had an 8.3 wins above replacement in the year 2017. Essentially what that means is how many wins that player brought to the team above an individual who was average at his position. So essentially, just Jose Altuve last year brought the Houston Astros 8 more wins than an average second baseman would have done. Another very important determinant of a player's value is their locker room presence and what they bring to their specific franchise. So this individual right here in this photo is Eric Hosmer. He plays for the Kansas City Royals. He is known to have great locker room presence and bring a certain kind of leadership to the locker room. Each individual franchise has to determine how much that is worth. Since there is no sabermetrics, at least not yet anyway, for that, the MLB team and MLB franchise must determine how much that leadership and locker room presence is worth to them. Finally, the last determinant is marketing ability. This individual in this photo is Bryce Harper. Bryce Harper is a right fielder for the Washington Nationals, and since he is in the public eye in terms of magazines, TV exposure, different companies have jumped on that to bring their marketing ability of this individual player. So Bryce Harper is in multiple T-Mobile commercials So that way, whenever the fans see him in the commercials or see him on TV, they not only associate Bryce Harper with baseball and the Washington Nationals, but they also associate him with a particular product like T-Mobile. So each individual MLB franchise has to determine how much each particular player is worth. In terms of their on-field performance, like their WAR, the wins above replacement, and their off-the-field performance in terms of marketing ability. There's also that one in the middle, like the locker room presence, which has the on the field and the off the field. And this is going to tie in to the marginal product of labor for their employees. It's a little bit different way of looking at it because there are so many determinants, and we only scratch the surface of that today. But the MLB franchises must determine how much each individual is worth and how much they can make off of that individual player.